I dismissed $14,000 in fines against a blind 86-year-old woman. Here's why I'd do it again. She walked into my courtroom with a white cane in one hand and her daughter's arm in the other. The prosecutor wanted $14,200 from her. For parking tickets, my name is Judge Judith Schindler. I've been on the bench for 43 years. I've seen fraud, corruption, and every kind of injustice imaginable. But nothing prepared me for Margaret Chen. The prosecutor, a young guy named David Hastings, laid out the case like he was reading a grocery list. 47 parking violations, 36 months, unpaid meters, street cleaning infractions, expired registration. He wanted the full amount, plus penalties. I held up my hand. He stopped talking. "Mr. Hastings," I said slowly, "did you actually read this file before walking into my courtroom?" He blinked. "Yes, Your Honor. The defendant has consistently ignored citations and failed to appear. I let those words hang in the air like smoke. Then I turned to the woman standing before me, hands folded, completely still. "Mrs. Chen, how long have you been blind?" 12 years, Your Honor. Macular degeneration. I turned back to Hastings. "The ticket started 3 years ago. She's been blind for 12. Does that timeline interest you at all, Counselor?" His face went pale. "Good, because here's what nobody had bothered to ask. Did Margaret Chen own a car? No. Did she have a driver's license? No. She surrendered it when she lost her vision. Did the address on the citations match where she actually lived? No. She'd moved in 2015. 3 questions. That's all it took. 3 questions that the entire Los Angeles municipal court system, with its automated processes, its collection algorithms, its army of clerks, had never once thought to ask. A blind 86-year-old woman had been racking up parking violations at 2 a.m. on Melrose Avenue, at midnight in Hollywood, in Venice Beach, in Koreatown. And not one single person stopped to say, "Wait, here's what actually happened." When Margaret moved in with her daughter, they sold her old car. A private sale. They had the bill of sale. They had proof. What they didn't have was the DMV release of liability form. One bureaucratic checkbox. The new owner never properly re-registered the vehicle. He just kept the old plates. Margaret's plates. And every ticket that car received, every red light, every expired meter, every 2 a.m. violation on a street Margaret hadn't visited in a decade, went straight to her. The system didn't care that she was blind. The system didn't care that she'd moved. The system didn't care that she hadn't touched a steering wheel in 12 years. The system just kept sending notices to a house she no longer lived in, escalating the fines, and eventually issuing a warrant for her arrest. Automatically. Efficiently. Without a single human being asking, "Does this make sense?" I looked at Hastings. He was frantically flipping through papers, the universal sign of a prosecutor realizing they've walked into a disaster. "The city is pursuing $14,200 from a blind octogenarian for tickets she physically could not have incurred," I said. "Do I have that right?" "Your Honor, the law requires. I know what the law requires, Counselor. I'm asking if you think this is justice." He didn't answer. Smart move. Margaret's daughter, Linda, raised her hand. She showed me her phone. Photos, timestamps, location data, Margaret's entire daily schedule documented for months. Doctor appointments, physical therapy, Sunday dinners. On every single date a ticket was issued, Margaret was somewhere else entirely. This family had been meticulous. They documented everything because they knew how vulnerable she was. Because they'd learned the hard way that vulnerability in America requires paperwork. Hastings made one last attempt. Even if Mrs. Chen wasn't the driver, the vehicle was registered in her name. She's legally responsible. I looked at him. If someone steals your identity and racks up credit card debt, should you be forced to pay it? That's different. Is it? Silence. Complete silence. Here's what most people don't understand about being a judge. Yes, I'm bound by law. Yes, I follow procedure. But the law also gives me something called discretion. The ability to look at the totality of circumstances and ask whether what I'm seeing in front of me is actually justice, or just bureaucracy wearing justice's clothes. And what I was seeing was not justice. I leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Hastings. You are going to go back to the city attorney's office. You are going to recommend that every single ticket issued after Mrs. Chen's sale date be dismissed, not reduced. Dismissed entirely. Your Honor, I don't have authority to, then find someone who does. Because if you force me to rule from the bench, I will do it in a way that generates publicity. I will make this a story about how Los Angeles pursued a blind 86-year-old woman for $14,000 in tickets she couldn't possibly have incurred. I paused. Is that the story the city once told? His face went white. My final ruling, Margaret would pay $225, half the value of 3 legitimate presale tickets, as a good faith settlement. The city would dismiss the remaining $14,000 immediately. And I was ordering the DMV to investigate who had actually been driving that car. Hastings accepted, because he had no other choice. As Margaret stood to leave, something happened that I'll never forget. She turned to face the gallery. Maybe 15 people scattered across the benches. Law students, people waiting for their own cases, strangers. And she looked at each one of them, her clouded eyes moving from face to face. Then she spoke. Thank you for being witnesses to what justice looks like. Her voice was soft, the kind of voice that had read bedtime stories, that had worked overnight nursing shifts, that had comforted people in their worst moments for 8 decades. Then she bowed. This 86-year-old woman who had been dragged through bureaucratic hell, who had feared losing her home, who had been treated like a number in a database, she bowed to that courtroom in gratitude. I had to look away. 43 years on the bench. I still wasn't ready for that. On her way out, she stopped at the prosecutor's table. Hastings was packing up his files, already texting his supervisor about the disaster he'd just experienced. Young man. He looked up. I hope you have a good day. I hope you go home to people who love you. And I hope next time you'll remember the people in these files are real. No anger. No bitterness. Just gentle correction from someone who'd lived long enough to know better. Hastings opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 3 hours later, the city attorney called. Not Hastings, the city attorney himself. They accepted the resolution. All post-sale tickets, dismissed. Margaret would pay her $225. The registration fraud, under investigation. I'd won. More importantly, Margaret Chen had won. But the story wasn't over. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. Judge, this is Detective Sarah Morrison, Fraud Division. We need to talk about Margaret Chen. My stomach dropped. What about her? The man we arrested, David Torres. He's talking. And what he's saying, you need to hear this. Torres hadn't randomly selected Margaret. He'd specifically targeted her. Because he lived 2 floors above her. He'd seen her in the elevator. Held doors open for her. Watched her navigate the lobby with her white cane, and then gone home and stolen her identity. He ran a sophisticated ring, 237 victims, specifically targeting elderly Asian immigrants. He'd accessed DMV records through a corrupt employee, found people over 75 with valid licenses, and built fraudulent registrations using their information. He kept detailed records of every ticket, every violation, every penalty. He was tracking how much the city was collecting from his victims. He made $40,000 selling fake registrations. The city collected nearly $250,000 in fines and fees from those same victims. Most of them paid without fighting. They were scared. They didn't understand the system. The letters were confusing. The penalties were terrifying. Margaret Chen was the only one who kept pushing until someone listened. Of the 43 victims with traffic court cases, almost all had paid in full stamps on their records. An 82-year-old Vietnamese woman, a 79-year-old Chinese man, a 90-year-old Korean woman, all of them crushed by a system that was supposed to protect them. When I testified at the subsequent hearing, the city's lawyer called my words inflammatory. The judge, someone I'd known for 20 years, overruled him without blinking. In the end, the city agreed to a settlement. Every victim received full restitution plus interest, $283,000 total. And more importantly, The case triggered a state investigation into how traffic courts handle elderly defendants. New mandatory fraud checks for defendants over 75. Automatic legal assistance for non-English speakers. Real consequences for cities that ignored obvious warning signs. I called Margaret to tell her, Mrs. Chen, because you fought back, 236 other people are getting their money back. Because you didn't give up, the system changed. She was quiet for a long moment. I just didn't want to lose my home. I know, but you did something bigger than that. Another pause. Will they really change, Judge? Or will they just go back to the old ways when people stop paying attention? It was the most quietly devastating thing I'd ever heard. And she was probably right to ask. I don't know, I told her honestly. But I promise you this. Every time I see a case like yours, I'll remember what almost happened. I'll ask the questions that need asking. I'll make sure at least one courtroom does better. Then it was worth it. Margaret Chen died 2 years later. Natural causes. Peacefully. In the home she had fought so hard to keep. Her daughter called to tell me. Before she left the courthouse that final day, after paying her $225, after the city formally dismissed everything else, she reached into her purse and handed me a small package wrapped in tissue paper. A hand-knitted bookmark. Cream-colored. Delicate blue flowers. I made it myself. Took me 3 weeks because my hands shake now. But I wanted you to have something to remember, that justice still matters. That bookmark sits in my desk drawer. Every single day, before I take the bench, I look at it. And I remember what this job is actually supposed to be. Not processing cases. Protecting people. The system isn't broken by accident. It's broken by design, built to process people efficiently rather than protect them justly. But when one person refuses to be processed, when one blind 86-year-old woman stands up and demands to be seen as a human being, everything changes. That bookmark is my reminder. Justice isn't about following procedures. It's about asking one simple question, does this make sense? And if the answer is no, having the courage to do something about it.